Hey everybody, I wanted to do a quick recap video to cover some of the Raspberry Pi connectivity stuff and getting it and starting Cloud 9. I figure a video will mean that you can go back and review the stuff at your own pace if you ever need to, or if you missed anything when we were in class. So you all know what a Raspberry Pi looks like, and you all should have gotten a memory card, a little micro SD card. And you can probably figure out where that goes by taking a look at the Pi. The Pi won't turn on unless the memory card is in there, so if you're having trouble getting it to light up, then that might be why. Now, for the first part of this, let's talk about what happens if you're just powering up the Pi. So you could be connecting it to a little USB battery pack, you could be plugging it into the wall, or you could be plugging it into the computer. And when you do that, it'll power up. I'll just get this set up while I'm talking here. And if you're here at LoisLab, the Pi is going to power up, little green light, right? And it's going to come online and it's going to join the wireless network here automatically, okay? So it's going to take maybe 20 seconds, 30 seconds for this thing to come up, and then you're going to be able to connect to it, right? If you're going to connect over wireless, then you're going to need to connect to it by name. Okay, so the name for all of the Raspberry Pis are Raspberry Pi 2 digit.local. So if you got a memory card with the number 13 on it, like this one, it's going to be Raspberry Pi 213.local is the name of it. If for some reason you can't connect using the name, you can also use the address, the IP address, and that's going to be 192.168.0.2 digit. So 192.168.0.213 in my case. All right. Normally the name should work. Once in a while the router here gets a little wonky, and then you can use the IP address as a backup. They really mean the same thing. All right, so this thing should be booted up now. So I'm going to open an SSH client or a terminal on my computer. Now I'm using a Mac. If you're using a Mac or a Linux machine, just open up a UNIX terminal window, and we're going to use that to use SSH to connect to the Raspberry Pi. If you're on a Windows machine, just like in the guide, you got to go and grab the PuTTY program first, because Windows doesn't come with an SSH client in it. So go and download that and then run it. It's going to bring up a little box, and you put in the host name that you want to connect to. Again, Raspberry Pi 2 whatever.local or the IP address, and hit open. In my case, though, since I'm on a Mac, I'm going to type in SSH Raspberry Pi 213.local. Make sure I spelled that right. Hit enter, and now it's asking me for, oh, I made a mistake here. So actually what you need to do, if you're using SSH, you need to tell it what user you're connecting as well. So that's going to be SSH Pi at Raspberry Pi 213.local. So when you're logging into this, your username is Pi, P-I, and your password is Raspberry. So I'll try this command again, SSH Pi at Raspberry Pi 213.local. Now it's asking me for a password. I type in Raspberry, and it logs me in and gives me a little prompt there where I can type commands. So it's going to be the same thing on a Linux box or a laptop. And in Windows, after you run the PuTTY client, it asks you for the host name and you hit open, it's going to ask you for the login and password. So then you put in Pi for the login and Raspberry for the password. So you should be connected now. So the other way that you can connect to the Raspberry Pi, which is important for you to know, is if you plug the Raspberry Pi into the USB cable and on this end and then into your computer on the other end, it's going to power it up, which is handy because it's going to run off of the USB port in your laptop or computer. But it's also going to do this sort of magical thing where it treats this USB cable like a network connection. And so on the computer, if you use the same commands to connect, you use the SSH client or you use PuTTY, and you connect to the name Raspberry Pi 2 whatever.local, it's actually going to connect over the USB cable, sort of like a virtual network connection. And that's handy if you're not at LoisLab. So at LoisLab, the Raspberry Pi automatically joins the wireless, but if you're at home, you need to get connected to the thing some other way because you can't obviously get to our wireless from home. Now, you can look up on your own if you want to go in and configure the Raspberry Pi to connect to your wireless at home. That's a little bit beyond the scope of this video, but you can do that. So you can get connected over the cable and then add it to your wireless at home if you'd rather do that. The advantage of being on the wireless network as opposed to on the cable is if you're just connected via the cable and the Pi isn't talking to a wireless network, you can't download anything. So like that step where we did a git clone to pull the rover repository of files down, that wouldn't work if you didn't have an internet connection. So those are sort of your trade-offs. Connect over the cable or connect over wireless. Either way, you can connect in via SSH or PuTTY and then get logged in and give it commands. All right? I just want to show you a couple of quick things. In the terminal window there, we call this the CLI, the command line interface, the terminal. They all mean the same thing. But if you guys haven't used UNIX before, then this might be kind of unfamiliar. So wherever you are, the little prompt will tell you what directory you're in. So right now it just says the name of the machine. You're Pi at Raspberry, I'm Pi at Raspberry 213. And then it shows a little squiggly line. That squiggly line means I'm in my home directory. If you want to see the full directory name that you're in, you can type pwd, that's print working directory. That shows me /home/pi. So at the root of the memory card is /, then home is a directory off of that, and then pi is a directory off of that. The little tilde, the little squiggly, is just a shortcut for that. So, if I go to the root, now it shows me the slash. If I type pwd, it shows my working directory as /. If I go cd/home/pi, that gets me back where I started, and it shows the squiggly again that I'm in the home directory. You can also, if you're somewhere else, like if I go back to the root, I can do cd squiggly, and that takes me back to the home directory. Now, I should have a dev directory here. So I went into a subdirectory called dev. Actually, let me back up. If you're in the home directory and you want to see what files you have, you can use the ls command. And that prints a list of all the files and directories in that directory. I personally like to do ls -al. That little modifier at the end gives me what I think is a more readable list, like it's a vertical list of files and directories. And it shows files and directories slightly differently. Directories are bolded in blue in my case, but on the left-hand side, there's all these like letters like D, R, W, X, R, all that stuff. Those show like information about the files. The one that I care about in this case is anything that says a D in the leftmost column is a directory. So if you're looking at a directory, you type ls and you see anything with D on the left-hand side, that's a directory, and you can move into that and see more files. So I can see here I've got a directory called dev, and that's what I'm calling the directory where I'm keeping all of my Python code. And if I do another ls, I'm going to do ls -al, it shows that I don't have anything in this directory right now. Now, in your instructions, there was a command to do a git clone and pull down that rover example. That's some code that's going to move the motors if you're building the robot from the kit parts. So I'm going to download that because that's going to be handy. Something else that's, I think, important for you guys to know is how to start Cloud9. And so let's take a look at that. So you already know the commands, they're in the guide, right? But let's just go over it really quickly here. So if you are in your home directory, I'm just going there now by going cd and the little tilde thing, and I do an ls in that directory, I can see a handful of files. And one of them is this file that's cloud9.ssh. In my case, it's bolded in green. It might be a different color or look a little differently on your screen. It's not a directory, it's actually a script file. The bold indicates that it's executable. And over on the left, if you see those little X's, X means executable. So to launch that, you can use the command from the guide. That's tilde/cloud9.sh. Now, when I was typing that command, this is just a little shortcut for you. If you're typing the name of a file, like in this case I'm trying to run cloud9.sh, if you type part of the word and hit tab, it completes it for you if it can figure out like what file you're talking about. A little shortcut there for you. And I'll run that, and that'll take a few seconds. It's going to spit out a couple of messages to me here. And what that's going to do is that's going to run the Cloud9 application and let me connect in through my web browser. So once you get the message that Cloud9 is up and running, you can connect a couple of different ways. So if you look in the window, it gave you a message that says connect server listening at http://192.168.0.213.8000. I can just copy and paste that into my URL, like my browser window rather. Obviously, that's going to be different for you. If you have memory card number 5, you're going to be 192.168.0.205, but the rest of it's going to be the same. So if I bring up a web browser, I can paste that in, and it's going to start loading Cloud9. It's going to ask me for a login and password. That's going to be LoisLab for both, all lowercase. And then it's going to load up Cloud9. It'll take a few seconds for this to load. Now, you remember a few minutes ago where I went into the home directory and then the dev directory so I could see my code files. I had to download the Git repository, but the code files I keep in the dev directory, and Cloud9 is set up to look in that dev directory. So when this launches, when this opens up, we should be able to see the files in that dev directory and work with them. So I'll show you what I mean by that in just a moment. Okay, so Cloud9's done loading up here, and in my dev folder here on the left-hand side, I can expand the little triangle, and then under there I've got a qbot rover directory. So when I did the git clone, it created that qbot rover directory with the files in it. So if I want to take a look at what's in rover.py, which is the main example file, I can just double-click on it, and it opens right in this editor. Now, in this editor, I can hack on the code, I can add things to it, I can modify things, all of that. And then I can just use file save to save my changes. Those changes are real time. And then I can use the run button, which is up in the middle center of the screen here, to actually execute that code. So in this case, all of this code sets up a couple of stepper motors, and it gives me 3 commands. If you look down the bottom, I can do rover move 0, rover move 1, or rover move 2. And if I look up here, rover move 0 is to go forward, rover move 1 is to turn left, rover move 2 is to turn right. So down in this loop in the bottom, I can script a series of commands and control the robot and have it drive around. So maybe you want to play around with this and have it do something else. You can change the code. You can change the order of the commands. You could insert some timing. You can also take a look at the other 2 files on the left here. There's stepper.py, which is the code that I wrote to control an individual stepper motor. And then there's steppers.py, which is it's a different data structure that's a collection of steppers. And so it allows you to queue up a bunch of moves for several steppers and then run them all as a batch. And that's how I get it to move the motors simultaneously. You can go in and take a look at that and hack on it. Maybe you could change the timing so the motor moves slower or faster. Or you could add another stepper motor if you wanted a sensor moving, sort of like I did in the robot I built with the laser sensor. So these are all options available for you. But so the point is, Cloud9 lets you get in, create your code files, edit them, and run them all in one easy-to-use interface, which I think is super useful. The last thing I want to mention, and I think I talk about this in the guide, is in Cloud9 at the bottom there's a series of tabs. And in this case, there's one tab that's already open that says Bash. That is that's a bash shell. That's just another CLI or command line, just like the SSH session. So once you get Cloud9 up and running and you're connected in the web browser, you can issue the same commands that you would do in the SSH window right here through Cloud9. So you can do everything you want to do right in one place. So just to show you what I mean, I'm in the bash window now. If I do an ls, the only thing in that directory is the rover directory. If I back up a directory so I'm back in my home directory and I do an ls, I'll do -al just because I prefer that, it shows the full directory listing there, and you can resize the window here so you get more space to view, all of that kind of stuff. So this is pretty handy. Now, I mentioned before that if you're writing Python code and you use the run button, it's going to run it. So if you've got code that moves your motors, it'll think about it for a minute, and then it'll start doing its motions. You can also do that from the command line. Now, this works in SSH or it works in the little window here in Cloud9. If you go into a directory where you've got your Python code, so I'm going to go into the dev/qbotrover directory, and I can see in here that I've got my rover.py file, which is the main robot control file. If I want to run that, and I want to do it from the command line, maybe I'm not running Cloud9 or something like that, the way to do that is to type Python 3, because we're using Python version 3, and then the name of the file you want to run. So that's rover.py. If I do that, it'll think about it for a moment, and then it'll start executing my code. Okay, so that was kind of a lot of things, but I just wanted to give you a quick recap. So getting connected with the Raspberry Pi over wireless, getting connected pretty much the same way with a couple of differences over a USB cable, a couple of quick commands in the UNIX command line that you might want to use, and getting started, starting up Cloud9 and getting connected to that, and then how to execute Python code both through the Cloud9 interface and from the command line. If you want to know any more about that, you don't have to wait on me to look into these things. You know a few Unix commands, you can use Google to find plenty more. Cloud9 has a huge support community. You can look up what people are doing in Cloud9. Raspberry Pi is super popular. You can find all kinds of articles online. So don't be shy about going and Googling more information, looking at what other people are doing for projects with them. There's tons of information out there on the internet. Hope that's helpful. I'll see you guys later. Bye.